Imagine a trade war between the United States and Europe, sparked by something as seemingly straightforward as oil and gas. It sounds almost unbelievable, right? But the reality is, it's not as far-fetched as it might seem. Could something as basic as the energy market have the power to reshape the global economy? That's exactly what we're exploring today. The trade deficit between the US and Europe has been a long-standing issue, particularly in recent years. Former President Donald Trump was especially vocal about it, raising concerns over the US's trade imbalance with Europe and proposing a simple solution: increasing oil and gas exports. But is that really the answer? Let's break it down and see if this approach can truly address the problem at hand. To begin, we need to tackle the big question. Why is the US running such a significant trade deficit with Europe? In 2023 alone, the United States exported $367 billion worth of goods to Europe. On the surface, that number might seem impressive. However, Europe sent back a much larger amount, $576 billion worth of goods to the US. This created a noticeable gap, a deficit of $209 billion in 2023. Even more concerning, this gap widened to a staggering $293 billion by 2024. At first glance, it seems like Europe is winning the trade game, with the US appearing at a disadvantage by importing far more than it exports. But here's the critical point. You can't focus solely on goods when discussing trade deficits. Donald Trump has often highlighted the goods aspect of trade, but there's more to the story than just that. The US actually enjoys a substantial surplus in services, a crucial factor that shouldn't be overlooked. In 2023, the United States boasted an impressive $115 billion surplus in services, a stark contrast to the trade deficit in goods. When we talk about services, we're referring to industries like technology, finance, entertainment, and more. Major American companies like Google, Microsoft, and Facebook generate billions of dollars annually from Europe. These revenue streams aren't included in the goods trade statistics, making the overall trade balance far more complex than just the numbers for tangible goods. So, why does Trump focus so much on oil and gas rather than the booming service sector? The US has a remarkable surplus in services, but these earnings are more abstract and less tangible than physical products like cars or machinery that people can easily see and quantify. The reality is that industries like tech, entertainment, and finance aren't just successful in the US. They are global giants, pulling in huge profits from their European counterparts. In fact, American tech companies like Facebook, Google, and Apple have established themselves as titans in Europe, generating billions in revenue year after year. This is why, when analyzing US-European trade, it's crucial to look beyond just physical goods and consider the massive role services play in the economy. Now, let's revisit Trump's proposed solution: increasing oil and gas exports. But is that truly a feasible way to balance the trade deficit? Let's explore the logistics. Currently, the United States produces around 22 million barrels of oil per day, consuming roughly 20 million barrels and leaving a small surplus. The US exports about 2 million barrels daily, with about half of that going to Europe. So, there is already some oil trade happening between the US and Europe. But is this enough to close the trade gap? The answer is more complicated than a simple yes or no. The challenge lies in the fact that Europe is already receiving oil from other major suppliers. Countries like Russia and nations in the Middle East have long-standing deals with European countries, making it difficult for the US to simply swoop in and capture a larger market share. To make a significant difference and substantially increase oil exports to Europe, the US would need to ramp up production in a major way, which could be challenging to achieve in the short term. Increasing production is not an easy feat. It would require substantial investments in infrastructure, and even then, there's no guarantee that Europe would turn to the US as its preferred supplier. Europe's energy market is already well established, with many countries holding long-standing agreements with suppliers that would be difficult for the US to displace. It would take more than a few adjustments for the US to make a significant impact on Europe's oil imports. And let's not forget the geopolitics of oil. The US would have to compete with various global players vying for a share of Europe's energy market, adding to the challenge of creating a lasting impact. Before we delve further into the complexities of this issue, let's take a moment to reflect. Are you finding this analysis helpful? If so, please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth discussions on global trade, China's rising influence, and the forces shaping the world economy today. Now, let's continue. Given the situation, one might wonder, is Trump's focus on oil and gas exports a realistic solution to the trade deficit, or is it merely a simplified response to a more nuanced issue? The truth lies somewhere in between. While increasing energy exports could benefit the U.S. economy in certain ways, it's unlikely to be the magic bullet that balances the trade scales with Europe. Instead, a broader strategy addressing not just goods, but also services, energy, and new technologies will likely be necessary to resolve the trade imbalance in a sustainable, long-term manner. As we move forward, it's clear that the trade dynamics between the U.S. and Europe are far more complex than they may initially appear. It's not just about oil, gas, or any single commodity. It's about an interconnected global economy where the flow of goods, services, and energy is constantly shifting. Can the U.S. meet Europe's oil needs? The answer is more complicated than it might seem. While there's potential for the U.S. to help Europe meet its oil and energy demands, doing so would require substantial changes in infrastructure development, changes that aren't currently in place. This brings us to another vital energy source: natural gas. Can the U.S. increase gas exports to Europe? Former President Trump suggested that natural gas could play a pivotal role in balancing the U.S. trade deficit. The U.S. produces far more natural gas than it consumes domestically, creating an opportunity to ramp up exports. However, a significant hurdle exists: liquefaction. Natural gas must be liquefied into LNG, liquefied natural gas, before it can be shipped overseas. Europe, however, currently lacks enough terminals to handle a massive increase in LNG imports from the U.S. While countries like Germany and Poland are working hard to build additional LNG terminals, these projects are time-consuming and expensive. Europe doesn't have the luxury of waiting for these facilities to come online quickly. So, even though the U.S. could technically export more natural gas, it's not just about producing it. It's about building the necessary infrastructure on both sides of the Atlantic. This includes more LNG export terminals in the U.S. and more import terminals in Europe. As of now, this process is slow and unlikely to be a quick fix for Europe's energy needs. Turning to tariffs, Trump's concerns extend beyond energy. He's also threatened to impose tariffs, which could have far-reaching implications for the global economy. Higher tariffs mean higher prices on goods, leading to inflation. The economy could slow down as consumers and businesses grapple with rising costs. If the U.S. imposes tariffs, Europe may retaliate with tariffs on American goods, making U.S. exports more expensive and reducing demand, which could further slow international trade. The consequences wouldn't be limited to U.S.-Europe trade. Global trade, including countries like India that heavily depend on international commerce, could be severely disrupted. The ripple effects could lead to slower global growth and possibly even a global recession. While Trump believes tariffs could help address the U.S. trade deficit, it's important to recognize that these measures might do more harm than good, potentially hurting not just U.S.-Europe trade, but also the broader global economy, leading to economic stagnation or a downturn. Let's take a closer look at the real impact of tariffs. The goal of tariffs is to impose taxes on imports from foreign countries, but the reality is that the cost burden is passed on to consumers. This means that instead of foreign governments bearing the brunt of the tariff, American consumers are likely to face higher prices. When you walk into your local store, the prices on everyday goods, whether electronics, clothing, or food, will be higher. The impact is straightforward: inflation. Many people ask how tariffs affect them directly. The answer is simple. Instead of the exporting country's government absorbing the cost of the tariff, the increased cost is passed directly to consumers. This results in higher prices for everyday items. It's that simple. Former President Trump often framed tariffs as a way for countries like China to bear the cost. But economically, this isn't the case. the financial burden ultimately falls on American consumers. Looking at the bigger picture, tariffs can lead to a global economic slowdown. If the U.S. continues with its tariff policies, the resulting disruptions could reverberate worldwide. Countries that depend heavily on trade, like India, could face significant economic harm. With tariffs limiting trade between key economies, global growth could slow, potentially leading to a global recession. So, what does this mean for the U.S. and Europe? As we wrap up, it's clear that Trump's concerns about the trade deficit are valid, but the solutions he proposes may not be as straightforward as they seem. Increasing oil and gas exports to Europe isn't as simple as ramping up production. The necessary infrastructure to support these exports isn't in place yet, and developing it will require considerable time and investment. As for tariffs, the risks are equally concerning. While Trump believes they could fix the trade imbalance with Europe, they might instead exacerbate global economic issues. Tariffs could lead to higher prices, slower trade, and a weaker global economy, outcomes that may ultimately create more problems than they solve. The big question is whether Trump's tariffs will help or harm. Will these policies address the trade imbalance with Europe, or will they simply lead to more economic challenges? The global economy is a delicate balance, and disrupting it with tariffs could have consequences we are only beginning to understand. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this matter. Do you think a quick fix could solve the issue of trade imbalances, or is there a deeper, more complex problem at play? Why do you think Trump might be overlooking the challenges involved? Let us know your opinions in the comments section. Want more videos like this one? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for exclusive insights into global issues, including how China continues to grow its influence worldwide. Stay tuned for our next video.